Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a story that sounds like it's straight out of a steampunk novel, but it's a chillingly real piece of 19th century history. We're talking about an event so audacious, so violent, that it sent shockwaves through France. It involves a desperate king, a revolutionary inventor, and a weapon so terrifying it was dubbed the Infernal Machine. This is the story of Giuseppe Fieschi and his nearly successful attempt to assassinate King Louis Philippe. Let's set the scene. It's July 28th, 1835, in Paris. The city is celebrating the 5th anniversary of the July Revolution, the very event that brought King Louis Philippe to power. He wasn't your typical monarch born into divine right. He was known as the Citizen King, a ruler who supposedly walked the streets like any other Parisian. But his reign was anything but peaceful. France was a pressure cooker of political tension, with factions from all sides, legitimists, Bonapartists, and radical Republicans, all vying for power and all seeing the king as an obstacle. Assassination attempts were practically a part of his daily routine. He would survive at least 7 of them during his reign. But on this day, the threat was unlike anything he had ever faced before. As the royal procession, full of pomp and military grandeur, made its way down the Boulevard du Temple, the crowds were thick. The king, flanked by his sons and his top ministers, rode on horseback, acknowledging the cheers. Little did they know that high above them, in a third-floor apartment window, a man was making the final adjustments to a homemade weapon of mass destruction. That man was Giuseppe Marco Fieschi. Fieschi was not your typical political idealist. Born in Corsica, his life was a long and messy series of failures and petty crimes. He'd been a soldier, a spy, a forger, and a drifter. He was driven less by a coherent political ideology and more by a desperate need for notoriety and a deep-seated resentment against a system he felt had wronged him. He was a man with a massive chip on his shoulder, looking for a way to make his mark on history, no matter the cost. He found his purpose, or so he thought, in the shadowy circles of Parisian Republicans who dreamed of overthrowing the monarchy. He wasn't alone in his plotting. He teamed up with 2 other conspirators, Pierre Maury and Theodore Pepin, who provided the funds and the revolutionary zeal that Fieschi sometimes lacked. Together, they devised a plan that was as simple as it was brutal, to wipe out the king and his entire entourage in a single, devastating blast. To do this, they needed a special kind of weapon. And what Fieschi constructed was truly the stuff of nightmares. He called it the Machine Infernal, or the Infernal Machine. Imagine this: 25-gun barrels, arranged like a deadly pipe organ, all mounted on a single wooden frame. Each barrel could be loaded with musket balls and powder, and a clever fuse system allowed them to be fired almost simultaneously in a massive, sweeping volley. It was a crude, homemade volley gun, a 19th century precursor to the machine gun, designed for one purpose: maximum carnage in a crowded street. Fieschi spent months building this contraption in his rented room, a grim secret hidden in plain sight. Back to the parade. As the king and his procession passed directly below the window, Fieschi struck a match and lit the fuses. The result was instantaneous and horrific. A deafening roar tore through the festive atmosphere, followed by a storm of lead that ripped through the crowd below. Chaos erupted. Horses reared, people screamed, and bodies fell to the pavement. The smoke was so thick it momentarily obscured the entire scene. When the smoke began to clear, the devastation was apparent. 18 people were dead or dying, including Marshal Mortier, a revered hero of the Napoleonic Wars. Dozens more were wounded. Their celebratory cheers turned to cries of agony. The attack was a massacre. But what about the target? In a near miracle, King Louis Philippe was almost completely unharmed. A single bullet had grazed his forehead, and his horse was hit, but he was alive. He displayed remarkable composure, staying on his horse and immediately seeking to calm the panicking crowd. His survival seemed to defy the very logic of the attack. What happened to Fieschi? Well, his infernal machine had a fatal flaw. While it unleashed hell on the street below, it also backfired spectacularly. 4 of the barrels exploded in the chamber, sending shrapnel flying back at the operator. Fieschi was horrifically wounded, suffering severe burns and head injuries. Stumbling from the window, bleeding and disoriented, he made a desperate attempt to escape over the roof of the building. But his trail of blood made him easy to follow. He was quickly found and captured, his grand moment of historical infamy cut short. The trial that followed was a national sensation. Fieschi, far from being a quiet, remorseful figure, reveled in the spotlight. He was arrogant, boastful, and treated the courtroom as his personal stage. He provided every lurid detail of the plot, seemingly proud of the carnage he had caused and eager to implicate his co-conspirators, Mori and Pepin. He saw himself not as a mass murderer, but as a figure of historical importance, finally getting the attention he had always craved. The public was both horrified and fascinated by this man who had come so close to changing the course of French history. The verdict was never in doubt. On February 19, 1836, Fieschi, Mori, and Pepin were taken to the guillotine. Fieschi remained defiant to the very end. He reportedly shouted, "Long live the Republic," just before the blade fell, a final, futile act of political theater. The aftermath of the Fieschi affair was significant. This citizen king, who had once prided himself on his accessibility, became far more guarded. The government, seizing on the public outrage, passed a series of repressive laws known as the September Laws. These laws severely curtailed freedom of the press, restricted political caricature, and made it easier for the state to prosecute its opponents. In a tragic irony, Fieschi's attack, intended to liberate France from a monarch, ultimately resulted in less freedom for its citizens. It strengthened the very regime it was meant to destroy and pushed the dream of a French republic even further into the future. The Infernal machine not only took lives on the Boulevard du Temple, but it also dealt a severe blow to the democratic ideals of the time. The story of Giuseppe Fieschi and his Infernal machine serves as a powerful reminder of how a single individual, driven by a toxic mix of personal grievance and extremist ideology, can unleash unimaginable violence. It's a dark chapter in the history of Paris, a moment when the festive air of a parade was shattered by the brutal reality of political fanaticism. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into a truly explosive moment in history. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the past. Let me know in the comments what you think about this event. Was Fieschi a misguided revolutionary or just a common criminal with a flair for the dramatic? I'd love to hear your thoughts.